Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Additional rounds of questioning may be called for. All members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Howell, you encouraged Congress just a minute ago relative to the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and what we could do in particular to having the Office of Inspector Generals look into the NGOs. I really am intrigued by that because I think it's something that committees are going to be lacking on if we don't do that. I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to take your idea, I'm going to pivot to a former lead official within the Office of Inspector General, Mr. Roth. How would Congress be able to approach the Office of Inspector Generals to be able to do the granular element of trying to find how the NGOs, we know we have an issue of financial management, which it came up minimal in the previous panel, where we're under Homeland Security, financial management of controls, of tracking monies. What did you see? What can we do, in your estimation, quickly, to be able to accomplish this goal for accountability with these NGOs?
Well, in my experience, IG's offices are extraordinarily sensitive to requests from their committees of jurisdiction. So the fact that you are the chair of a subcommittee of Homeland Security means that typically, or at least in my experience when I was IG, we would take that very, very seriously. So my advice, for what it's worth, is that I would have your staff call their staff, engage in some discussions, and then perhaps follow up with a formal recommendation or a formal request as to the sort of scope of the work.
And in terms of NGOs and their ability to, given the financial management element, we know that we're under high risk under Homeland Security right now. Were you able to find things within NGO funding after it had been let to the NGOs that were on your radar screen when you were a part of the Inspector General's office?
Not in the immigration context, we weren't.
Okay.
And, I am unfamiliar with the source of this funding to the NGOs, whether it was like a Department of Homeland Security grant or some other federal agency. Obviously, we'd only have jurisdiction over, that is, my old office would only have jurisdiction over sort of a Homeland Security grant.
So I want to pivot back to you, Mr. Howell, because you talked, you're adding these NGOs into what you call the border industrial complex, and you mentioned that $6 billion were spent under the Biden administration that was specific to the NGOs. Did I understand you correctly on that?
Yes.
And that there are 230 different NGOs involved. Can you name 5? You don't have to do 5. Okay, but a number of NGOs, just right offhand, that you feel like were the most egregious offenders?
Right, so at DHS, there used to be a board that kind of oversaw the distribution of the funding, and on that board sat some of, we'll call them the name brand national charities, and those would include people like, Catholic Relief Services or Catholic Charities, USCCB, one variation of that, Lutheran Relief Services, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, all of these kind of mega organizations that play in the disaster space sat on that board that distributed money through a web of nonprofits. And I'm sure the number far exceeds 230, but there's a reason why the left did it this way. It's so that you couldn't get at who actually ended up with the money and how they spent it. It is doing the government's work outside of government to evade this type of oversight. And so I'd encourage you guys not to rely on the IG community, who has not shown an interest at all in this $6 billion, who sat by and watched the worst border crisis in history happen in front of them, but to go get the information yourself, which is your constitutional duty with your subpoena power to these nonprofits, make them turn over financial documents, records of illegals, have them answer questions, and so forth.
So you mentioned, though, engaging the Inspector Generals in this process. So in addition to what you just laid out, how would you see engaging the IG's office in this effort?
Yes, frankly, I don't think they're going to be that willing of a partner because they haven't shown an interest in the border crisis over the last 4 years. I think it's certainly worthwhile to ask, but I don't think Congress should absolve themselves of the constitutional responsibility by a request to the IG. I'd even be looking at law enforcement. A lot of this activity borders on criminal.
It's good. It came up, Mr. Shuby, a minute ago. You got 30 seconds between you and I about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and how they were the ones that, under the ability of what was supposed to be a network of information protection, stop our electric grid from being taken down, they were farming out internet policing to these NGOs. You got 15 seconds. What would you want to say in terms of what we can do to get to the bottom of that in the process?
You know, I didn't mention this in my remarks, but I think the same suggestion. I think the IG community or Doge could look into which NGOs were benefiting from this financially and what they were doing with that money.
Thank you all very much.